It all started when I was about 10 years old, during one of those hot summers spent with my extended family at the beach house. My family was huge. My father was one of 9 siblings, and each had children of their own. The house was so big that we could fit over 30 people comfortably. It was a paradise for any child, especially since my cousins and I spent most of our time running around the property, playing by the beach. But one thing about that summer still haunts me. I was always close with my Uncle Joseph. He was kind, charismatic, and always seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel better, no matter the situation. Uncle Joseph was a licensed therapist and psychiatrist, and I confided in him more than I did with anyone else. There was no subject too uncomfortable for him, nothing was off limits. But that summer something changed. I started having nightmares, not the typical bad dreams but vivid, disturbing ones that stuck with me long after I woke up. It was always different, but they shared one common thread: fear. Fear of abandonment. I'd dreamed that my family had disappeared, that I was alone, and no matter how loud I screamed, no one could hear me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, only to fall back into the same dream, night after night. It reached a point where I couldn't escape them. After a particularly horrific string of nightmares, I decided to confide in Uncle Joseph. He listened intently, scribbling notes in his little notebook. He said I needed to reflect on my inner feelings because something was clearly weighing on me. At first I didn't understand. I was just a 10-year-old kid. What could I possibly be upset about? But Uncle Joseph, in his calm, collected way, assured me he could help. He said that though I might not realize it, I was harboring deep resentment toward my parents, something my subconscious was trying to tell me through these nightmares. I was confused. I had always been a good kid, obedient, polite, and loving. I could never resent my parents, not in a million years. But Uncle Joseph was adamant. He said I needed to be more disobedient, challenge my parents, argue with them, say no, do something out of character. I agreed, desperate for the nightmares to stop. For 3 days I did exactly what he said. I argued with my parents, ignored their requests, and pushed back at every opportunity. It felt horrible, but I kept thinking it would make the nightmares stop. But instead, they got worse. The dreams became darker, more vivid. In one, my family was torn apart, screaming as we were dragged in different directions. In another, I was standing alone in a graveyard surrounded by tombstones with no one to call for help. I couldn't take it anymore. I returned to Uncle Joseph, begging him to fix it. That's when he told me something that still makes my skin crawl. He said that my brain was too mature for my young body. I needed to set it free. I had no idea what he meant, but I trusted him. He said that if I had one more nightmare, he would tell me exactly what I needed to do. That night, I stayed awake, terrified. I didn't want to know what he meant by setting it free. But as the night wore on, I felt my eyelids grow heavy, and I drifted into sleep. That's when it happened. I woke up before I could even have the nightmare, which had never happened before. I was frozen in place, unable to move, but not in sleep paralysis, just paralyzed by fear. I stared at the wall, heart racing, not sure what I was waiting for. Then, I heard it, a whisper, right next to my ear. It was Uncle Joseph's voice, soft and menacing. I spun around, but he wasn't there. I screamed in terror, and the next thing I knew, I was alone in my room, the door slammed shut behind me. My heart hammered in my chest, and I knew something was horribly wrong. I ran to my parents' rooms, sobbing, and told them everything about the nightmares, about Uncle Joseph, about what he'd said. My dad didn't waste a second. He stormed into Uncle Joseph's room, and within moments they were in a violent confrontation. My dad was a big guy, and Uncle Joseph didn't stand a chance when my father got angry. It wasn't long before my dad found Uncle Joseph's satchel. Inside, he found notebooks filled with disturbing notes, detailed descriptions of nightmares, articles about inducing dreams, specifically nightmares, and pages of personal data about his experiments on dreams. It was sickening. The police arrived shortly after, and when they went through Uncle Joseph's computer, they found even more horrifying things I'm too disturbed to even think about. Uncle Joseph was arrested, but I never saw him again. My parents never talked about it, and even now I can't bring myself to ask. Sometimes I wonder how close I came to something far darker than I can imagine. I can never forget the whisper, the way my uncle's voice sounded so close, like he was right there, even when he wasn't. The nightmares may have stopped, but the fear never left.